while you are showing this graph of farm income, now crops are very different, and crop cycles are very different as well. So sugarcane has a 12-month or 13-month cycle. So I think if we include all those things, I doubt whether to what extent those numbers can be,
So my answer to that is you can also do this crop by crop, state by state, and then but in terms of whether imputed land is included, I may not be. I don't know. We'll check. I also don't think so. Yeah, I also don't. But we can check that. It'll be in the thing. Yeah. Okay. One question here, and then we resume. Yeah. Okay. One question here.
Sir, we know that water is essential input to the agriculture. In the banking sector, two terms, banking nationalization, it made a big revolution in the banking and credit. So when we can expect all Indian rivers are nationalized? So is there any policy nationalization of rivers?
Can you name one thing that you don't want nationalized? Should we nationalize this lecture also, my friend? Okay. Yeah, quick. Yeah, last question here.
I just wanted to ask you,
Please.
Form of tenancy has any effect on the different outcomes in different states as such? Sharecropping, fixed rent?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Again, I think the data, will it allow you to answer that question? No, unfortunately, it won't allow you to answer that question.
The kind of interlinkages that you have in the input market as well as the output market, that has also affected the results.
See, here we've shown you what the outcome is. I think you can break it up by state, which we've done. You can break it up by crop, and you can break it up. I'm told you can't do the breakup by tenancy arrangements.
One point you can make.
Yeah, please. You can have the last word.
As we are saying that imputed value is not reflected in the income, then how we can say that income tax should be imposed on the large farmer, then if we are not have any mechanism to calculate the income. Secondly,
No, but for, remember, for tax purposes, I think the tax calculation will be very clear. What goes as revenue, what goes as income. That's very clear. This is more.
I just want to say that those people who are not farmer and showing their income as agriculture income must be taxed, and you will get a lot of revenue.
Okay, so he's that's the answer to your question. You were asking a question. Okay, one last question. Yeah, please. Clarification. Yeah.
You have told about January to March being the season when there is increase in agrarian credit.
Yeah.
Surge in agrarian credit. Who are the possible beneficiaries of that? Because that's almost like an off-season kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's basically, I mean, the implication from the study is that there's a lot of gaming that goes off the system. That you could people who are not agriculturalists borrow because you get concessional rates of interest on that. So it's basically gaming. So anytime you have distortions in any market, you saw in fertilizer, leakage happens here because after all, remember here again, one way to think about is that we have different prices for the cost of capital, depending upon the end use. If you're in manufacturing, you get one cost of credit. If you're agriculture, you have other cost. And as soon as you have all these things, people will try and start gaming the system. These are costs that are intrinsic to having these kinds of interventions. So let's move on. Remember, I said that loving too much. And here's one kind of piece of suggestive evidence that shows maybe, it is taking its toll. So you see, for example, this is a chart on the left of agricultural growth in Punjab and India. And you see how, and if you go back, the discrepancy between Punjab and India would be even greater. But even in the 80s, agricultural growth in Punjab was much greater. It's amazing how much it's decelerated. And then you look at overall growth as well. Now, overall growth as well has kind of now lags India quite substantially. Yeah.
This is at constant prices. From 2004-5, MSP has been going up. So at current prices, the growth in Punjab would be pretty good. At constant prices, it would not be that.
Yeah, but I would argue that it's, in terms of real incomes and things, it's constant prices that matter, right?
No, but
farmers essentially receive the current prices of MSP, which are going, I mean,
No.
they doubled in last.
So essentially, you're saying that we should a constant price series might underestimate the improvement in farm incomes that could happen, but remember that that's happened. It's true. I mean, I think to some extent what you're saying is true, but that happened also in buffalo livestock exports, in sugar exports, in all those exports. So yes, Punjab will be disproportionately affected, but maybe it will also affect other parts of India as well. And then you see a corresponding that overall GDP growth also has declined, and if you are right, then it aggravates the puzzle there, right? Because if you did so well, your incomes went up, despite that, overall GDP growth didn't grow as much. So there's something to the story about, agriculture. There's been over specialization, overuse, which has not led to, or at least which has led to significant slowdown both in agricultural productivity in Punjab, but also in overall dynamism in Punjab relative to the rest of the country. Now again, this is an area where again, a lot more could be done in terms of your own research, in terms of what you could get your students to do. But so to me, just as a way of framing what's happening in agriculture, I think this could be one way of doing it. So now we go to, who do we love too little? I think I'm going to give you, if we love cereals and sugar in Maharashtra too much, maybe the crops that we love too little are pulses, I would say dairy and livestock, and also fruits and vegetables. So, but the interesting thing is that we love them little in different ways. And I'm going to tell you how the different ways in which we love them little are. So let's take pulses. The thing is that I think, when was it? I was asked to write a report on pulses in India, and I submitted the report about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And also this work is based on that. So the interesting thing, of course, is that India suffers from protein deficiency. So this is a chart of income per capita. It's an IMF chart actually. And what is the consumption in calories per capita daily? And what you find, of course, is that over time, countries tend to consume more protein. India, you see again, is way down below the chart. China and the US US is way above the chart, and China is also not following the same pattern. But the really striking thing is how far below we are. Our protein consumption it needs to double from a kind of nutritional point of view. And yet, of course, we see that you saw, for example, look at domestic production. We saw the longer term picture. Domestic production has not grown by as much as demand. And that's why certainly in the last few seasons, we've had to import quite a bit. And that's varied across time. The gap between the two is net imports. So we have rising demand, but supply which is not very strong, and volatile supply as well. That's and we'll come to a very good point that you made earlier. So here, and now I'm going to answer your question as well. Now, what we did in the Pulses report was to say precisely the point that was made earlier, that we have a system, as I said, of setting minimum support prices for the different crops, for 21 different crops. Now, what we argued very, very strongly in that is that these MSPs should not only reflect private costs, but also social costs. Because if Punjab overuses water because of paddy, it's a cost for everyone in the country. So economics teaches us that prices will reflect private costs, should reflect private costs, but where there are externalities, i.e. my doing something affects all of you positively or negatively, prices should reflect that. And so here in the Pulses report, we did an elaborate return. So we said that, so the MSPs should therefore reflect normal returns, which is what they do now. Then it should also affect returns if, for example, you're in rain-fed agriculture like pulses. There's going to be more volatility of prices. Therefore, if you want to boost production, you have to correct for that as well. And then we also said if there are externalities, we should correct for that as well. So I think we did, I mean, this, by the way, this is not the first time this has been done. I think both in our survey, but we drew upon Professor Ramesh Chand's work. But I want to show you how we did this calculation. So we did this for, you see, remember, when you do these things, you have to have a sense of what is potentially growable where. And for example, what we you know, after talking to all the agricultural scientists in India, we said that the two competing crops could be tur, and it could replace some of the paddy being grown in Punjab. The same would be true. It could also replace some of the paddy being grown in Uttar Pradesh as well. So if you wanted to encourage tur production in Punjab and Western UP, what should be the pricing that you should offer compared to rice? And here, okay, here's the question about the question that was asked about volatility. Here, it's not price, this is quantity. It's a coefficient of variation, but on what, production or price? We have to check. So this shows you basically this is the what is this couple? Oh, okay. See, it's basically production variability. That's what it is, right? And you can see rice, because of being in irrigated area, because MSP is there with procurement, you get much more steady supply, reflecting also the point that you made. But in tur, you see it's much more variable because of there being much more price volatility and quantity, and also being rain fed. Now, so what we did was the following. So we said the risks are much greater in pulses, 2 to 3 times, and hence we need to give a price premium. And essentially what we did was, we'll come to this in a second. So the calculation we did was that if you do a simple MSP, which they do today, you should provide a minimum support price of 76 rupees per kilogram. The current MSP for tur last season was 5,600. Yeah, around 5,600. So we said, if you adjust for risk, you have to give 133. And if you adjust it for all the externalities, you should give 152. So how did we get these numbers? Now I want to take you a couple. What do I need to do here, my friend? This is, can I do this? It'll work? Okay, this is the only Excel sheet I want to take you through. So I'm going to say, so this is tur, this is Kharif paddy, this is the yield, this is the, so this is the coefficient of variation that I just showed you, 0.3 for tur and 0.09. So the question we have before us and for the classroom is, what should be the MSP price? That's why we have question marks there. And for Kharif paddy, it's about 14,700. Yeah. So what we do is the following. So first, we then, to calculate all the externalities, we get this from various research papers. So we say the fertilizer subsidy per hectare. Now all this is going to be per hectare. So much for tur, so much for rice. Groundwater subsidy, and this is based upon how much fertilizer per unit and how much water per unit are used. And then, no, I want to be clear, this is a cost subsidy, this is a cost, this is a benefit, because if you grow pulses, it fixes nitrogen in the soil, so that's a benefit. Now, then we say, GHG, how much emissions of CO2? Pulses is 0 because it fixes, and this is for, now these are all numbers that are estimates. Again, all of you should encourage your students to think about this. So we get the net cost of tur is 495 per hectare. The net cost of paddy is 13,000 per hectare, and then we say therefore the net social benefit, that key number of growing tur relative to paddy, is in fact 13,000 per hectare. And we argue that this should be reflected in the MSP that's given for tur. Yeah. Yeah.
Why have we added nitrogen benefit as a cost?
No, so that's, I told you, it's, that's why it should be, we'll clean it up. As I said, the fertilizer, the water, and the GHG is a cost. The nitrogen is a benefit. That's why it said benefit. So it should be, you could see from the cell, if you just to convince you that we haven't made a mistake, you see cost. Yeah, say minus M3, you got minus M3. So okay, so we've not thing. So then what we do is the following. So what we say is that this is the this is the cost per hectare you add up. That's basically the number there in column G2. You see, G3. That's 36,000. Then the way you calculate it is what is the profit in the alternative crop in rice? How much profit do you get? And then you say you add up the two. This is the simple MSP, which is cost of growing tur plus the return in the alternative crop. So tur must be must provide as much returns. This is what we get. Then to this we add, say, look, more risk. So to the profit you must multiply it by 3.3, because remember this is the relative risk. This is basically 0.3 divided by 0.09. What is the relative risk? So to have equal risk you must increase it by 3 times. And then finally this is the social MSP when you add just simple plus externalities, because the social 13240 you have to convert it back to per kilogram. So if you add return to competing crop, then the risk and the externalities, we come up with a number saying it should actually be 3 times what it is today. So
and crop burning will add more, sir.
So okay, I was just going to say this, but this doesn't include all the costs of paddy. One very important point that he made, if you add in the environmental costs of paddy burning, this will actually go up. Yeah, that's a very important addition. In fact, we say in the report, we don't include this because we don't have data on this, but in principle you could. So now what this tells you is 2 things. What this tells you is firstly that we need to rethink how we give MSPs and so on. And I think this is kind of the way forward. If you believe that prices have an impact, then if you want to change patterns of production, using the price mechanism and using it in a way that reflects all these things would be a very important way of actually incorporating all the things that we've discussed. So it addresses the concern that you raised, but the numbers are very striking. Now let me tell you what the problem is. I mean, it's easy to do the calculation. So the first thing I would urge you to go to this Excel spreadsheet will be part of we'll distribute it to the people, exactly, you can take it. And I would urge you to, now here's the thing, of course, remember, 2 things I want to say. Supposing suddenly we discovered a better yielding variety which gave us, then the MSPs can be lower. So if you get technological progress that increases the yield of thing, then maybe we don't need to increase prices by that much. But here's the problem with this, right? Remember, okay, we say in Punjab, if you wanted to grow tur, you have to give this. But remember, we cannot have one MSP in one state and one MSP in another state. So if you can only have one MSP, then this might be appropriate for Punjab, but it may be far too high in some other states, and therefore you may get too much. So to do the research and the analysis is easy. To actually implement it, how do you implement it? That is why if you go to our report, and the actual price that we recommend is actually closer to 109 or 90. We say 90?
So it's 120 social plus risk, and what we recommended is roughly 75 here in the first column.
In the first column 75, and then so, because we also assume that we could get higher yielding varieties of tur, and you would get that. So remember, I think I wanted to take you through this calculation because it's a way both of internalizing social costing as well as what are the variables that could change and what are the problems with it, because you can't have one MSP for one crop in one state. So how do you compromise is a difficult policy question. Yeah, you had a question?
So why don't we, whenever we are setting MSP, we take into account the cost of production, which includes per unit of output, so includes the impact of decline in the yield. So if the yield is declining, we still increase MSP. But shouldn't actually the MSP calculation just be based on the cost of cultivation per, let's say, hectare of land? Because there you don't have to really worry about the decline in yield leading to demand for increasing the MSP.
So here's a very good point. See, the point is that essentially what you're saying is that if you make it dependent on yield, then the perverse incentives are created. Yeah. So one way to get around that would actually be to say that this is a standard that everyone should meet, and we take not the actual but some standard based on that, and then we keep doing that and not link it to actual yields. Absolutely, that's a very good point.
And less fertilizer will have less health burden,
yeah, exactly.
less cancer patients.
Yeah, so exactly. So, but that we're reflecting.
No, sir, fertilizer. They just see the fertilizer subsidy. In the case of paddy, it's very high. So that means they are using a lot of.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why we're correcting that here. We're correcting by saying that. So there, remember, that fertilizer number is going to therefore reflect in higher MSP for Tur. That's how we're correcting for that.
More fertilizer means less production.
Because this entire
yeah, sorry, yeah.
This whole calculation is based on the this CV. This is a coefficient of variation. Yeah, whatever.
No, not the whole. One part of it.
Yeah.
Because the externalities have nothing to do with it.
Sir, but it is a produced, now it's a produced in the more in the rain-fed area. But if we are switching from rain-fed area to more controlled area, so obviously we will have a lower CV, lower instability. So
remember, that's a fair point. Now remember that essentially what I would do is initially start off with this, and over time as it comes down because of this, then maybe reduce the markup. Over time we can reduce the markup.
So what about MSP? Can we downgrade MSP?
Now we come to a different, so can I say one thing on that? That's a very good question. So think of it in conceptual terms. Okay, in conceptual terms, we give an MSP for Tur and for paddy. Okay, now we know that the farmer looks at the relative thing. So the two ways of achieving that relative thing are, so today paddy is here, Tur is here. The two ways of achieving the relative are this, which can never happen, or this will have to happen. So that's what will happen. Yeah, sorry, and then we have to move on, yeah?
So the question that I have is 108, or the overall value that you suggested, was based on just Punjab, or it's taking into account the...
No, so the markup, so remember, all this externality data, our estimates for the case of paddy, it's presumably based on Punjab, and the markup we have calculated is overall. We've not taken paddy production in Punjab. It's overall paddy production and overall Tur production, and then got the coefficient of variation. But again, you can do it state by state, crop by crop, whatever you want to do, yeah.
So competitive means here difference in the demand gap with regard to Tur and Kharif,
No.
or what fulfillment? I just want to ask.
No, the competitive means that if you get a certain profit from growing paddy, you must get the same profit, i.e. after paying cost, you must get the same profit per unit, per kg and per hectare.
Should not we take then difference in the demand gap as such for the two crops?
See, all that demand will get reflected in prices and profitability. Okay, now, there's a question here, and then we move on, yeah.
Yeah, this MSP, is it independent of the support price which government announces?
MSP is the support price. It's the minimum support price.
No, this support price is basically announced before the crops are cultivated.
Yeah.
And MSP is announced after the crops are being harvested.
No. The MSP is announced before, and that, you see, in the old days, there used to be a difference between the MSP and the procurement price. But now that's been eliminated, and now we have just one MSP announced in advance of the sowing season, so that farmers can know in advance what is the minimum they will get. Yeah?
One question, sir. We call MSP as minimum support price, but we are not selling the prices of the farmers' product, because
Kapil, go back. Yeah, sorry, yeah, please.
MSP is known as minimum support price, but in other ways, for the farmers, we are not selling the prices because the farmers are forced to sell their produce on that price only, because the government system is not able to provide them support. They are not able to buy all the product they are available in the market.
I said, remember, let's be clear how this works, right? If the market price is above the procurement price, farmers are under no obligation to sell it to the government. If market price is below procurement price, then the government is obliged to buy it at the procurement price. But you're right. Now, that may not always happen. And in the case of what I said earlier, when I said we announce it for 21 crops, but we only do effective procurement for rice and wheat, it means that exactly that in other cases, including this year for pulses, for example, the market price went below the minimum support price, but because there wasn't enough procurement, you couldn't maintain the minimum support price. So it does happen.
But in most of cases, it happens that the middleman, which dominates the agriculture sector, the buying, they force the.
So ask the question. What is the question?
So I am saying that the
question.
Yeah, that is what. This minimum price, MSP has become a ceiling for the farmers.
No, nothing prevents the farmers from, if the market price is above the MSP, nothing prevents them from selling it at a higher price.
It's a kind of guarantee.
Yeah, it's only a floor. It's not the actual. Okay, now let's move on. Okay, so I want to come to a point that was raised earlier by the gentleman here. So the question is, often what happens, and I'm going to make 2 points here, that often what happens is that when we think about farm policy in India, there's always a conflict between, or perceived conflict between, consumers and farmers. So I'll tell you, I want to say 2 things here. One way it manifests itself, is very important, is when prices start rising too much, we tend to impose export restrictions on crops. So that, when you put an export restriction, the domestic price will come down, which of course will end up hurting farmers. So when we had that big world rice price going up, there were export restrictions. Today, for example, there are export restrictions on many agricultural products. So that's a clear case of a farmer and consumer interest, kind of being in tension. And so often what we do is that if prices go up, we impose export restrictions. If prices come down, we impose trade restrictions, import restrictions, and that's how we try and balance the 2, right? But there is, I think, a deeper point here, which certainly applies to crops like pulses. Remember that in the case of rice and wheat, these are basically international products. And in principle, you can buy and sell in international markets. Subject, of course, we may have tariffs, we may have export restrictions, and so on. But in the case of pulses and fruits and vegetables, I would argue, and we argue in the pulses report exactly the thing, is that there is actually need not be any conflict between the farmer and the consumer. The reason is the following, that, for example, this year supply went up, prices came down. By the way, this year the government did a very good job. It increased procurement of pulses by about 2 million tons, but despite that, about 50 to 60% of the sales of farmers was at below minimum support prices because we could not do enough procurement. Now, but coming back to that, so the conflict between farmers and consumers is overstated for the following reason. If this year prices come down, and they came down below MSP, then, so it seems like this year the consumer benefits, and he has. But next year what's going to happen is these low prices will maybe persuade farmers not to grow as much next year, and then you can think of the supply curve going back up and hurting consumers next year. So you think, if you look at it only from at one point in time, you think there's a conflict between producers and consumers, but if you stretch the horizon, there need not be any conflict, because a low price this year elicits a bad supply response next year, and prices go up. So my plea in the Pulses report was exactly that we should take a broader view of a 2-3 year time horizon for this, and that is why higher MSPs in the case of, say, Pulses will not lead to inflation like it might lead to other cases, because there will be a supply response. And so this, I think, is a very important point to understand, that yes, there's a conflict, there may be a conflict, and all governments react by using trade policy to to kind of reconcile this tension between farmers and consumers. But often what they do is they may end up aggravating this tension rather than reconciling the tension, because in the medium term, there may be no real conflict between farmers and consumers. I think that's a very important point. Now, in terms of loving too little, here I want to make the following points. I think, again, I don't want to get into social policies here at all, but I think that social policies can have economic costs, and I think we have to understand what these costs are and do a proper cost-benefit analysis. So essentially, that in the case of livestock farming, the returns to either dairy or cattle, it very much depends on the terminal value of assets. I think, so for example, in the classroom, I would like you to do an exercise where you say, okay, these are the data for cow, buffalo, whatever. Let's say we model this, it's an asset that lasts 10 years, 15 years. What are the returns every year? And what would happen if the terminal value of that asset was, for some social reason, undermined, right? And then you should maybe do these calculations. No one has done these calculations, and I'll tell you what, there's a kind of interesting parallel between what I'm going to suggest here and the MSP calculation that we did. So essentially, that if there's a decline in terminal value of an asset, that's something you can't sell a piece of cattle that is now no longer productive. There will be an income loss if you can't sell that. But in addition, it's a double whammy. Not only can you not get the sale from selling that, you will then have to maintain that cattle for a much longer period of time. So you will add to the costs. Essentially, that therefore the returns to that activity will or could decline in a way that could affect the incentive to undertake that activity in the first place. So, so those are the private costs. And there's a very interesting paper here that actually shows, that seems to show, based on actual Indian data, that the returns to holding a buffalo or a cow are actually very, very low in India. And now I haven't looked at it carefully. I read the paper. It comes from a very respectable set of authors, but it shows basically that the returns are negative in India to holding livestock. I mean, we should look into it. But the point is that if these low returns are going to be, if you further depressed by social policies, then I think we should do a proper cost-benefit analysis. Now, the first 2 points are private costs. This third point, just as we can have social costs with fertilizers and subsidies, we can also have social costs by driving down the terminal value, because stray cattle could spread diseases. So the social cost-benefit analysis could also change a lot. And I think this is something that we should have more research to do the costing. What are the private costs and what are the social costs that could arise from changing the terminal value of assets? I think, so I would say that pulses, it's one form of loving too little. Dairy and livestock, it's a different form of loving too little. Now, in the case of so there's something on agriculture here which I think, for example, if you look at Because if you think about it, one of the most important ways that you can raise agricultural productivity is through technology and R&D. And as a country, we spend too little certainly compared to China and other agricultural countries. We don't spend enough on agricultural R&D. We don't spend enough, for example, on enough on extension. We used to have very good institutions for extension. I think those are all under stress. So I think we need to invest. So this is on the public side. So on the private side, the question that was raised about whatever GM, etc., I think that it's clear that we need technology both from the public sector and the private sector. That there is a very good article by Harish Damodaran about a week ago in the Indian Express, and essentially his point is that when it comes to evaluating the risks and so on, we seem to be treating farmers very differently from when we treat other. For example, he says, cell phones, do we really think that cell phone use and having cell phone towers is more risky than GM, for example? I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I'm just posing that question. But why is it that when it comes to GM, we get all exercised about asking these questions, but when it comes to all kinds of risks in other sectors, we maybe don't extend the same kind of analytical cost-benefit approach? So I think that if you want to, get more private technology, which we should, I think we need to look at, what we do. Do we protect property rights enough? Do we give enough of an incentive for technology transfer? I think these are very important questions that we should consider. Now, in the case of fruits and vegetables, I think the loving too little takes the form of not having one market in India. So I have to confess that when I first took up this job, I wasn't aware that when it comes to agricultural products, we don't have one market. We don't even have 29 markets. We have something like, 4,500 markets or so, because within each state, there can be, many APMCs, many APMCs. So this is just a chart to show what the price variation is in India and in other countries. So this is a chart this is for the different crops. What is the ratio of the price, or the 95th percentile price and the 5th percentile price? I.e., supposing you took a survey of prices in India today on Tur. It'll be a distribution. You take the 95th and the 5th, or the 5th and the 95th, and compare. Now, if you have one market, of course, that should be the same price everywhere. A little bit transport cost might vary, but it should basically be the same price. What you find is that ratio in India, certainly in many crops, it's 4-5, 3-4-5. Whereas if you look at the United States, back in history, or even today, today or even back in history, you will find that there's much less price dispersion and there's much more price dispersion in India. And it's not, and then also in the survey, we calculate what is the difference between the farm price and the wholesale price, and then the wholesale price and the retail price, and you will find, and that's the chart we have. There's a huge amount of, it's in the chapter. There's a huge amount of variability in prices across India. Now, this is a case of loving too little, because in a sense, if you think about an APMC, it basically restricts the choices that farmers have. So farmers, let's say, they don't get effective procurement for these crops. They're not able to sell wherever they want or to whomever they want. And also that if there are extra restrictions, they're not even able to sell overseas. So these are all restrictions on some of these other crops. That is why we say, this is maybe for these other crops, we kind of love too little. Now, here's the question. Now, supposing it's true that we love some too much and love some too little, how do we change this? How do we change this? Because I think it's clear that, it is going to be, and it is shown to be, not just in India, but all over the world, if you give a subsidy or an entitlement or a favor, it is very, very, very difficult to withdraw that, because people mobilize around that and say, and create political protest, and so it's very. So I think conceptually, the one way to, the only way I think we can think about getting out of it is to not reduce the amount of support, but maybe change the way in which this support is given. So instead of giving a subsidy for how much you're using, supposing you just said we give you a flat amount, and then but you're going to be charged market prices for fertilizer, etc., etc. So the key thing is that you want to change the incentive in using any of these things. So one calculation we did was, supposing we did this in Punjab, supposing we said, this is the total, this comes from papers by Professor Ashok Gulati. What is the fertilizer subsidy? What is the fertilizer subsidy? How much is the total? What is the agricultural population? And supposing we could give, convert all this into a kind of universal basic income, how much would it cost, and how much could we afford? So we do this, we've done these calculations, power fertilizer replaced, maybe power fertilizer Manrega is replaced, and you get numbers that seem something like, I think 1 lakh crore, 1 lakh per cultivator in Punjab would allow you to replace the power fertilizer and Manrega. I'm not by any means suggesting that this should happen. It's not government policy, it's not my policy, not anyone's policy. But conceptually, if you think about you wanting to change, because remember, in Punjab we saw how dynamism has basically disappeared. So the question is, how do we change that? And it's clear that you can't change it by removing any of these things. The only thing you can try and change is by affecting the incentives, by changing not the magnitude of support, but the form of support. And again, so we came to loving some agriculture more. I mean, pulses, dairy, vegetables, and so on. You see, often when someone is asked, supposing I were to ask you, what needs to be done for pulses, what needs to be done for dairy, all of you will give me 10 very, very good suggestions. I can guarantee you all of you will give very good suggestions. But here's the puzzle, right? The puzzle is that it's not that these solutions are not known. People know these solutions, and yet the question we have to ask ourselves is, why hasn't it happened? Why hasn't it happened? And I think part of the reason could be that we had the Green Revolution, we wanted to promote cereals, and we did all these things, but now, there's now a kind of big, political constituency around that, and these are people who have a lot of power, right? So the question is, at some level, if you really wanted to change, and remember, I think the key point is that part of the reason we love cereals, remember, it's a big reason I should have mentioned earlier, is that something completely unrelated to the production side, it's actually the PDS. Because we want to provide consumer subsidies in the form of food, because we are wedded to that politically, and there are good reasons for doing that, it's because of that we love cereals and we incentivize cereals. And as a consequence, the cereals thing, entitlements in cereals become very salient politically, and therefore very difficult to withdraw. So if you were to ask me, how do we change this for pulses or dairy or livestock? I mean, we know what needs to be done, but we haven't done it for, or we're just beginning to do it for many, many crops. My Marxist friend has gone back, but I think there is something to saying that, if in some ways some of these people need to acquire some kind of mobilization and power in order to maybe actually change the ground realities in terms of, getting more policy action. But of course, I would argue that, and related to the question that was asked earlier, maybe we can begin with much more transparent pricing. Maybe we can say that why don't we do social costing and pricing instead of private costing and pricing? At least we can begin to change, some of the things that, some of the incentives facing farmers, so that things can slowly change as well. And so conclusion, I've been through all this. Essentially, remember, I began with Ambedkar. I think that, we at some level, both we as a country and Bollywood has contributed to that. We kind of have romantic notions about farming and farmers. I think we need to be a little bit more, stop being this romanticizing in a kind of one kind of way, and actually address this in a more hard-nosed, realistic way, and see how we can, both the dual challenge of how do we love some agriculture less and how we love other agriculture more. I think that could be a kind of framework for thinking about all the issues in agriculture. So I'm going to stop now and open myself up to questions now.
What about the agro-based industry? Because agriculture production is basically driven by
Also, this local sourcing, because if we look at the distribution of liquor industry or pharmaceutical industry or the byproducts from the agriculture, basically there is a complaint, farmers are complaining that to subsidize the consumer and to subsidize the basically agro-based product, we are penalized. Like the cotton farmers, we suppress the cotton prices much to subsidize the, to incentivize this cotton industry, basically the garment industry, garment exports.
No, I think we do just the opposite, by the way. We do just the opposite. If you look at the GST taxes on cotton-made and man-made fiber, cotton-made garments and man-made garments, it's exactly the opposite.
Because
we give lower taxes on cotton-made garments and much higher taxes on man-made garments. So just factually I'm pointing out. But I think the broader point that you're raising is how do we promote agro-industry? I think that's a very good question. I think how we need to, but there, warehousing, maybe retailing, maybe more foreign direct investment, we can do all kinds of things. But we have to stop thinking that, if you want to do that, that maybe the government has to keep doing this. That doesn't seem to be working.
Sir, particularly, basically in this Western, there is a social unrest because there is a huge demand for the meat and this related product in the Middle East. So basically the people, the farmers are not bothered about the life span of their cattle. Basically they see now the cattle price is much lower than what is the price of meat. So basically the international dynamics is also working on this, particularly this dairy industry or particularly this livestock. So the livestock sustenance, the livestock is such, the sustenance is not determined by the product, but also by the byproduct, which is driven by internationally, particularly the meat prices. It's not that the farmer don't want to retain it, but there is no point to retaining it because the live animal is less beneficial than what is a dead animal.
Question, yeah, you haven't asked a question, yeah?
So when we consider the social benefits and social costs in the calculation of this MSP or the pricing, and you have pointed out that in the case of Tur, the nitrogen fixing is a social benefit that we have to consider.
Yeah.
So what I want to know, the paddy cultivation also has some important externality benefit in the sense that because I come to Kerala, the paddy field is a rich source of retaining the water level. And during some decades back, when the massive conversion of paddy fields for other purposes, the level of water availability in Kerala has been dropped dramatically. And nowadays we are we are moving backwards. That paddy fields are largely being subsidized, and with a lot of intervention, the previous paddy fields are being cultivated in order to increase that level of water also. So it means that externality benefit we have to consider.
See, point number one, all externality benefits need to be considered. But the point you're making is that in the case of Punjab, Actually, it's exactly the opposite. There's waterlogging and salinity and all of this because of too much paddy. You're saying that in Kerala somehow it's different. So if it were true, I don't know the agriculture there, but huh?
That's a monsoon water there.
Yeah. So it could be because you're getting monsoon water or whatever. So it could be different. So the principle that you should have externalities is correct. But I'm not sure whether your particular example of rice in Kerala is correct or not. I just don't know enough. I know in Punjab it's exactly the opposite.
Punjab they use irrigation.
Yeah, and again, and there's waterlogging because of that. Yeah. Question here. Yeah. Yeah. So see, when the Commission on Agricultural Costs and Prices, when they do the basic costing, those costs are based on all India averages. So they take into account everything. And when you do the social costing as well, we have to do it based on all India averages as well.
Sir, you argued that minimum support price may not lead to inflation. Can you say why is it so?
So the point is that, okay, take the case, supposing, take pulses, right? Suppose prices comes down below MSP, okay? So inflation this time will come down, but because farmers will not produce enough next year, they may reduce supply and prices will go up next year. Whereas if you maintain MSP, next year the supply response will also be good, and therefore next year's prices could be lower enough to offset what happened this year. So it's a yeah. Yeah, please, yeah. For those who haven't asked questions especially, yeah. My friend also has a question.
Earlier we discussed
Yeah.
subsidies versus UBA within the framework of social cost benefit analysis. Now agriculture sector and health, in India agriculture, environmental sector, environment, then other sector also suffering from market failure. Then when we move by eliminating all these subsidies, if we introduce UBI, then is it capable to operate, to internalize externalities and other issues, market failure?
See, that's okay. So there are now two different questions, right? It's a very good question. That supposing we got rid of all the subsidies, right, and the UBI replaced all these subsidies. That's one thing. The question is whether you should your MSP thing. The point is that I think UBI is one thing, but whenever we do pricing, it must reflect all costs and social costs and things. So the two are slightly, separate actually. You have to keep the two, at least conceptually, you have to keep the two separate. If, for example, paddy burning is going to create environmental pollution, I think the MSP should reflect that.
One is endowment correction, other is price.
Price correction, exactly.
Sir, may now ask the question?
Yeah, please. That means I have to give him a chance as well.
Okay. Sir, it's related to that pricing MSP which we are talking about. MSP, now it's a word is minimum, but practically it works as a maximum. I'm talking from practical part of it because of two reasons. First reason is that complete value chain is not connected, and second is the kind of holding capacity which had to be offered in support of that MSP is not available. What happens that middlemen, they used to collect the direct crop from the field and try to give minimum cash, whereas those collection points established by government, whenever the payment will come is not very certain. Keeping that to immediate lower cash or something like a kind of receivable in future compels the farmer to sell at the lower price. Second thing is that self-life is also, hardly this government is of course trying their best to improve the self-life of the, perishable items. But if until unless that agro-based industry is going to improve, entire exercise will be simply a kind of whatever standard deviation we were talking about 2.9, it will remain like that. If we are targeting something 0.7, until unless the answer comes from the different sides, it will not be possible. And second point, sir, that the way any manufacturing components, there is no control of price even if the demand goes up or supply is increasing. Whereas you rightly said that the moment too much of crop is coming in the market, instead of keeping it as a buffer, normally by banning export or something like that, the price is indirectly or even sometimes directly targeted to bring it down. Without taking care of that, the producers who has put it, they doesn't have any incentive to continue and have the hedging on their own through their own underlying. So I think government has to not only look from agro sites or agricultural research activity, even allied activities and alternative use will make this a long-term solution for Indian agriculture.
Point well taken, yeah. Point well taken, yeah. Yeah. Question here, question there, and then we go for, okay, please, question there while you're getting the mic, yeah.
So, if we say that price should reflect all the costs and benefits, will that impact the affordability of essential commodities?
No, see, remember that what we're saying is that, now, it's possible, it's a good question. I mean, it's possible that, for example, in what we're saying now, supposing it's true that you need to reduce paddy MSP and say increase the tur MSP, just as a hypothetical example. I am arguing that that increase in the MSP for tur need not lead to an increase in prices over time because of the supply response. So it's not necessary, therefore, that the price of essential commodities has to go up. No, but what is your counterfactual? The counterfactual is that, in the absence of the MSP, supply might have increased so much that the price goes up. So it's relative to that counterfactual. You have to see. Yeah, please.
The second conclusion is very important, that minimum support should continue and the alternate should be. So in this case, what can be done is that, suppose X farmer is growing wheat using a lot of fertilizer and pesticide. We can guarantee him that the income you are getting this year will be maintained, but you will have to grow the wheat organically, and that will create a lot of positive externalities.
You see again, you keep talking about, the thing is that, one, we don't know what the costs of organic farming are relative to this. Second, no, I mean, you see, again, you're increasing the monitoring requirements. How do we know that he's doing organic and he's not doing organic?
Network of agriculture departments, that can be done, and it is being done by private players.
So I think that, instead of, my preference would be to change the pricing to reflect the thing, and getting into, kind of, whenever you make demands on the state to monitor more, to intervene more, I think it has its own costs. You have to keep that into account when you recommend something. So, yeah.
Sir, I had a very small question.
Question here.
This is more eco-philosophical question.
Yeah.
That 6,000 rupees per person UBI here. For example, we implement, for an instance, 650 rupees per person. So that comes out something around 7,200. So around 13,000, 14,000 rupees per person per year we are giving UBI. So everybody is above poverty line as per our definition, and India is 100%
poverty free.
Poverty free.
Yeah.
But who is going to grow now at the market rates? Because when the market rates, electricity will be there, at the market rates, fertilizers will be there. Now who is going to, and will it going to be a profitable venture? Because in the current scenario also there is no profitability coming out in this sector. Then what is going to happen? We are poverty free, but we are declining as far as the growth is concerned. So how you see this if we take all these things together?
So, good question. So the question is that, essentially what you're saying is that all these subsidies have the benefit of increasing agricultural production, and by definition, by converting this into UBI, we are going to change because in fact in some ways that is the point of the UBI in some ways, right? You go from production based incentives to incentives or income unrelated to incentives. Now remember that here we saw that in the case of Punjab, maintaining those incentives was leading to declining agricultural productivity. So at least there is some evidence that this is kind of not working or working maybe even in perverse ways. But the broader question is that supposing you took away these subsidies and had basically appropriate pricing, the fear that we would actually compromise, let's say, our food security concerns, I think that could be, and that's something we have to see. Now, my response to that would be that we can build in food security concerns maybe into our social costing as well. Because after all, we can say that's a social benefit we have from not having to have the anxiety about things. And we can build that into social costing as well. And I think that because we are trying now to address the problem of, in certain parts of India, there's overuse leading even to declining productivity. So at least in that case, we know that some of the detrimental effects that you're envisaging, maybe that won't be as sharp as because the evidence is showing that at least in the case of Punjab.
Sir, to address his concern.
Yeah, Mike, please.
What is getting confusion is second fundamental theorem of welfare economics and first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. What MBI or what UBI, Universal Basic Income Transfer, is going to do is it will correct the endowments. And then obviously you can expect some price rise because of the concerns that you are raising that fertilizers and all other inputs would be charged at market prices. But then there are many states which are not using these inputs, let's say MP, Chhattisgarh and all those things, which don't get, let's say, fertilizers and electricity subsidies to that extent. So their production in response to price rise would be much greater. And you will see the correction in the agriculture, growing patterns as well. So it is, the two are essentially targeting first and second fundamental theorem of welfare economics. You correct the endowment and then correct the prices.
My friend, no comment, my friend. You've acquired a very good reputation. Your reputation, you've acquired a very good reputation.
See, your point is well taken, but you see, if you cited the Professor Rave's paper, there is a study which shows that whenever India or China enters in international market, either as exporter of the cereal or importer of the cereal, price fluctuates by 25%. And therefore, in the post-liberalized period, Indian agriculture has actually suffered because of the international price fluctuation, but for that very limited period of 2000.
You can't forget that. I was going to point it out. You can't forget that.
But for very limited period of 2004 to 2009, very limited period, and therefore, unless we go for general equilibrium analysis, we cannot say it is all partial analysis.
So I think we should let's get all the general equilibrium analysis. I think
partial analysis.
Okay. One last question. One last question by someone who hasn't asked a question. Okay, one last question and then we stop. Because I want to begin the next session as 1:45 because we have much more material to go through because we want to finish at 4:15. We may have to have a 2.5-hour session, not a 2-hour session. But let's quickly wrap up. 1:45 we meet. Last question. Yeah.
This question is connected to the question that I asked previously, which is that we are assuming supply response to price here. And in a context where there's very high levels of price variability, how do we understand supply response? For example, in recent years, the output of fruits and vegetables have even surpassed cereals now. But they face a very high levels of price variability. You classified those into the non-tradable category.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I haven't done the analysis of you can have price variability and you can have a supply response as well. I mean, both are possible. Maybe the variability will dampen or aggravate the supply response. I don't know, but it's something that we need to look at more closely. But I showed you, remember I showed you yesterday that fertilizer diagram. I think that's really very good evidence that, you know, incentives and prices do matter in, you know, our farmer pricing and, you know, input and output decisions. So to what extent, how it gets affected by variability, I mean, these are questions we need to study in much greater detail. So, okay, thank you very much, and then we meet at 1:45. So